Well, this next one's kind of a fun video. We have Piers Morgan on his show Uncensored talking about these California reparations, and we actually have somebody from the Reparations Task Force here giving some weird cockamamie answer that I actually don't believe in, but we're going to roll it for you. The question for the comment section on this video is, do you think people should be paid reparations for injustices that happened in the past years ago by those that never were involved in those injustices, don't believe in those injustices in terms of, I don't like racism, I don't like slavery, I don't like all those things, but I didn't do it, so why is my taxpayer dollars going to somebody that wasn't even involved in racism in the first place, or doesn't really have a connection some do, to those injustices of the past? Again, I didn't do anything. I shouldn't be being paid the price for what somebody else did hundreds of years ago. Let me know in the comment section below. Let's go ahead and roll it.
Welcome back to Piers Morgan Uncensored. The California Reparations Task Force this week voted to approve recommendations on how the state can compensate black residents for historic discrimination. Governor Gavin Newsom has praised the task force, but appears to be cooling on its advice, perhaps because it could cost $1.2 million per person. This debate is everywhere right now. The British monarchy has faced repeated calls for reparations for historic links to the slave trade. Well, BBC journalist Laura Trevelyan recently quit her job to campaign for reparations, having donated £100,000 herself to Grenada, where her family historically owned slaves. So is this a form of historic justice, or is it just divisive? Well, I'm joined by a member of the California Reparations Task Force, Jovan Scott Lewis, and Fox News contributor and civil rights lawyer Leo Terrell. All right, welcome to both of you. Jovan,
Thank you.
Let me ask you about this, because on the face of it, I've talked about this quite a lot recently, I don't understand how the pain from historic sins gets eased by bunging a load of cash to people now, almost all of whom will have not suffered the original pain. So explain to me.
Sure, thank you for having me. So what we're doing in California is we are dealing with some of the more recent experiences of discrimination, beginning with the period of Jim Crow here in the state of California. So what we call these are really the lingering effects of slavery. And so we're not providing reparations or recommending reparations for slavery itself, but for the ongoing institutional and state-based harms that the African-American community has faced.
But it's not.
Wow. It's not really about racism, or in other words, I should really say slavery. That was obviously racist, but it's about the racism and the injustices that happened in the past, going back to Jim Crow and others. That's insane. It's basically like anything that happened wrongly to black people in general, these are what the reparations are going to be a part of. Folks, you could say that about every single race in human history. In human history, something bad has happened to them. You look at the Italians, you look at the Irish, you look at the Jewish. I mean, every Native Americans, black people, even white people were slaves at one point as well. So it's so insane that they're pushing the agenda going, well, something bad happened, and so because something bad happened, somebody else should have to pay for it. I agree that bad things happened to black people. I don't agree with the evil and the injustices that our country did upon them. Virtually every race and ethnicity had something bad happen to them by every country, not just America. The idea that we'd have to pay out every single situation and every single variable that goes involved into this is insane. It's an insane idea. Folks, it's so insane that literally somebody was there at the task force saying that we should pay out $200 million to each black person in the state of California. That was it was like $460 trillion or something like that. And then I took the average or the aggregated wealth of the entire globe, the entire planet wealth was only $419 trillion. So they wanted a state of California to pay $460 trillion. If you took the entire world, the globe, it was $419 trillion. There's not enough money. There's literally not enough assets to do something that they want. But this is their thinking. They just shout stuff to the skies and go, well, this is our plan.
Not only African Americans. I mean, look, slavery was an evil, evil thing. Nobody denies that. But it's not just African Americans who have suffered historic sins and ills against them. Where do you take the logic of this argument? Does every community in the world who has been mistreated historically, are they all worthy of financial payment? And if so, how is the world going to pay all this stuff, given we're already suffering a global financial crisis?
Right, that's a fair question. So what we're doing in California is we have effectively calculated the economic losses that the black community faced as a result of state policies. And so we're effectively tracing, the capital that this community lost over the past, century and a half of discriminatory, state policies. And the argument is that we're building a reparations proposal around those direct losses. In addition to that, we have, dozens of policies and programs that are helping to effectively end the kind of discriminatory cycle that African Americans have faced in the state.
Who's going to pay the bill?
Well, thankfully, that's not the task force's job to figure out. Our
Folks, there's so much to grab a hold of. I know a lot of people don't like me pausing these videos, but that's what we are, a political commentary outlet, show here, whatever you want to call it, where I give my opinions on things, especially as a math teacher here, a statistician. I'm going, okay, you're talking about capitalization that took place, the losses that took place. You guys, when there's equations that are developed, when there's calculations that are being made, there's things called variables here, a multifaceted analysis of what's taking place. To give you kind of connection, what I think's happening here is these progressive left, these people that just make up stuff in their minds, and then they try to put it into practice, but don't actually have a way of actually putting it into practice. They just figure it out to somebody else, which is what he just said, is, there's that idea of like, oh, women make 70 cents on a dollar. It used to be like 59 cents. We do actually talk about in the book, Trojan Horse, how the left is destroying America. They just take the average of things. It's what's called a univariate analysis. But there's what needs to be conducted as a multivariate analysis. Every black person's situation was different, predicated on the injustices that were pushed down upon them, or the oppression that was given or pushed down upon them. So every person's situation is different. That's not, I guarantee you that's not in the calculation, because that's an insane calculation. How do you even do that? So I think what they did was aggregate this data, come up with a number, however the hell they did that, of these losses that are dependent on different areas of California, different inflation rates of the locality that's happening to them, the different taxation that's imposed upon them, different redlining that's imposed upon them, different loans that they can or can't take out. I mean, you guys, it's so head spinning. I don't believe this guy one bit. I don't think one bit this guy actually came up with a realistic calculation per individual of what they need to be paid. They just came up with a freaking number out there in the ether. They probably aggregated all this data and just took the average of the loss that somebody would have had. So somebody could have had an injustice that actually kept them down drastically, a massive loss on their family, and somebody that maybe had or had incurred very little loss, they both get equal weight. How is that fair? If you want to talk about injustice in the past, you just screwed over a family royally that sat there and had a ton of losses compared to somebody that had little losses, and they both get equal payout. Is that what's happening here? I don't know. That's what it sounds like to me. It's insane. Hey, how are you going to pay for it? Well, that's not up to us. We just came up with a number and had to figure it out. Folks, you want to know who pays for it? The taxpayer pays for it. How else is the state? What, is the state going to sit there and sell treasury bonds or just T-bills or whatever the hell they want to sell the state bonds? You think that's how they're going to pay for it? I don't think so. They're going to tax us. That's how they pay for it. Come on.
Our job was to create a methodology for compensation, for calculating those harms, and we're passing it along to the state legislature. I think the state has a variety of options of how to pay for this. The state, if it decides to pay for it, again, we are recommending compensation. We have come up with calculations for how compensations can be arrived at. But the state has a variety of, I think, instruments and approaches to how to stretch out a payment if they decide to do so.
All right, let me bring in Leo Terrell. You've been waiting patiently. Your response to this, Leo?
Well, you've done a great job of asking the right questions. First of all, they cannot prove any form of direct damage at all. I challenge them as a lawyer, as a civil rights lawyer, Piers. Here's the situation. They talk about institutionalized racism. Where is it? You got black mayors in this state. They talk about systemic racism. Where is it? Where's the white boogeyman that they're talking about? They cannot prove that people of color, black folks, deserve $1.2 million. Does Kamala Harris need it? Does London Breed, the mayor of San Francisco? Does Karen Bass, Barbara Lee, who's a congresswoman? They can't show this. What's the real reason behind this, Piers? I'll tell you what it is. In 2020, during the summer of riots, you had a governor named Gavin Newsom who wants to pander to black Americans in California in order to run for president. And I will submit to you that if such a bill was even contemplated, there would be a challenge to it because it violates the Equal Protection Clause, it's unconstitutional, and it's racist. And I would be the first as a civil rights attorney to challenge such a law. Last point, Gavin Newsom came out a couple of days ago, Piers, and said he is not inclined to support reparation in a cash payment.
All right, listen, you've made some fiery...
It's not always a cash payment, folks. It could be, I mean, I guess it technically would be a cash payment. One of these reparations they want to institute is allowing black people to buy a home in the state of California for $1. That's one of the things they took seriously. $1. Like some of the houses go for what, $1 million to up for $1. I don't know. But somehow they calculated that in there too. Don't ask me how they're doing it, folks. Don't ask me. I have no idea. I've read some of the stuff, by the way. I don't know how they're getting these numbers. It is insane.
Points back there. So, Jovan, I guess my overview has been about this issue. Are we now in this country, for example, going to seek some form of payment from descendants of the Romans and the Vikings for their marauding around
Exactly
Britain?
what I said.
And if not, why not? In other words, what's the difference really ideologically behind what you're striving to achieve for the African American community for historic issues and that? And me saying, well, I'm sure some of my ancestors were mistreated by Romans and Vikings. I'd like a large check, please.
Sure. And that's a fair question. And, you know, counter to your other guest's claim, we have established the exact record of harm. What we're talking about is that the African-American community, as recent as 1973, here where I live in South Berkeley, was demolished. A commercial district was demolished to build a train station. You're talking about African-American communities that were demolished to build highway systems. So the record of harm is clear. It is direct. And I really do welcome your other guests to view the interim report that we released last summer, which is a 500-page detailed report of the specific and direct harms that African Americans in the state have faced at the hands of state policy.
Folks, if you're new to the Bald Brad Show, I'm just looking for where the answer is to the question that was proposed because it was nowhere to be found. He completely dodged it. Completely dodged the question.
Policy. And that's what we're after.
But I would say this, Jovan. I mean, there are other communities. The gay community of the world, right, have all had discrimination from the state, right? You could argue. And you could argue that's caused a lot of pain and harm. So do members of the gay community globally, are they entitled to take your lead and say, right, we were discriminated against by states. We want money for it. In other words, where do you end?
Great question.
Sure. Where you end is with state responsibility. And so if those other communities and any communities can establish an actual record of state harm that is intentional, and what I'm saying is that these harms were intentional. We're talking about redlining, where black communities were directly targeted by state dispossession. We are talking about an exact record that has been established. And so if any community can establish a similar record, then I encourage them to make a claim. This is what we're talking about.
Okay.
This is not about a cultural issue. This is about a record of harms that the state should be responsible for.
I understand.
That's so insane. I would also like to point out that California was never a slave state. But that's part of the calculation they're throwing in there. If you notice, he sat there. He knew that the slave idea was going to come up. And he knew that California's not a slave state. So that's why he sat there and transitioned to, well, there was redlining, Jim Crow laws. There's some sort of discrimination that happened to black people, which is true, 100% true. And it is evil. It is wrong. I 100% agree with that. But to sit there and say, and his logic was linear. At least his logic was linear, going, well, yeah, if you could sit there and calculate that, then, you know, hey, why not have somebody pay for it? That's wild. That is so wild. I mean, you could sit, and by the way, you can have a crippling of a society too, because if you go back farther enough, well, you took my land, well, you sat there and destroyed my family, you removed this, you removed that, or whatever it may be, I think we should have this back. Now you just crippled entire society. Everything actually falls apart, by the way. So anytime you try to have somebody's injustices paid for today by some evil action of the past, you hurt those that are happening today that never did anything wrong. It's like when you have two kids, one kid actually does something bad, and then you have a kid that does something good. Well, rather than punishing the kid that was bad at the time that it happened, you know, you wait a few weeks and then you punish the kid that did something good. He's going, what the hell am I getting punished for? Punish that guy. We tried to do reparations in the past, and we partially actually did in some way, shape, or form. But, you know, that time has come and gone. Is it terrible? Absolutely. But for you to reach back in the past, when does it stop? It is an endless ideology. It's a crippling ideology. I don't agree with it, but I want to know what you think in the comment section below. Do you agree with reparations? If so, how much should black people get paid? All across the United States. And if so, please support your evidence with the calculation, because we would love to sit there and analyze that here on the Bald Brad Show. I hope you enjoyed that clip from the Bald Brad Show. If you did, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you can stay up to date on all our future content.